All right, I want to talk about some of the plants that minerals need today. I probably will go a little bit shorter today. I know that just about everybody well, it's been 2 weeks and we're starting to get used to it, but we're also ready for a break. So we'll just see how it goes. Don't forget your quiz. Please try and have it done by 3 p.m. That's 3 p.m. If you haven't quite maybe had that completely soak in yet. So minerals plants need, in other words, what we normally call plant food, except plant food makes us think like eating and nutrition and nourishment, and they don't really get nourishment in the sense of the that we do from food, because of course, plants do photosynthesis and make their own food energy. So plant food, so-called, is more like plant vitamins and minerals. So there are three what are considered major plant nutrients because they are needed in the largest quantities. There's the big three, and then there's a bunch of minor nutrients. There's actually a bunch of minor nutrients, and I'm not going to ask you to know all of them. But the big three of all plant nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is in the form of, plants use nitrogen in the form of nitrate. You might remember that the air is like something like 78% nitrogen N2, but plants can't use it. They have to have it converted to nitrate. The reason nitrogen is such a big deal is because it is needed by plants and by people, by the way, to make protein. And if you remember from the beginning of the year, proteins are very important. Proteins are what get everything done that gets done in an active sense. Now, let's see, what was I going to tell you? They use nitrogen as one of the main components of protein. Protein is, I don't know an exact percentage, it depends on whatever exact protein we're talking about, but protein's probably 10 to 20% by weight. I mean, nitrogen's probably 10 to 20% by weight of most proteins. Very important element in building proteins. Phosphorus in the form of phosphate. Phosphorus is needed to make nucleic acids. It's a component, a building block, a part of the nucleic acids. So it's needed for DNA, RNA, ATP, and some other things that we haven't talked about, I don't think, like GTP. And again, it's a key element involved in it. It's a key part of the nucleic acid. So they really, really, really need the phosphate. The third big one is potassium. Potassium is usually called potash when farmers or gardeners are talking about it. I think that's because it used to be common to put the ashes from the bottom of the wood burning stove, the burning pot, onto the garden and so on. It is necessary to activate enzymes. Now, it's not a key component, or at least not a large component of the enzymes. You remember that enzymes are proteins, but it is a key important factor in those enzymes turning on. And without the potassium, you're going to have problems. Now, every plant food you're ever going to want to look at has 3 numbers on it. They may not be these 3 numbers. I mean, this has got it stamped all over the place, 15, 15, 15. And what that means is, I don't know if you can read it there, but it says total nitrogen, 15% right there. And it says available phosphate, 15%, and soluble potash, 15%. So the 15, 15, 15 means 50 in the 15% nitrogen, 15% phosphorus, and 15% potash. And that's just the standard way to do it. Any fertilizer, lawn fertilizer, farmer fertilizer, Miracle-Gro, they're all going to have those 3 numbers, but they can be all over the place. Like lawn fertilizer might be 3600, 36% nitrogen and nothing else, because lawns make lots of grass, and grass needs lots of protein to grow. A cornfield would need a lot of would need a lot of nitrogen and a lot of potassium and phosphorus, so there would be a different combination for a cornfield. Something like this 15, 15, 15 would be a something to use generally on a lot of gardens or crops, but it's not a real specific application for any one thing. So all fertilizers have 3 numbers on the front, and they are the percent of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Triple 12 is a real common garden fertilizer. I don't know about these days. Used to be that a lot of people just, triple 12 was what they were going to put on their garden. So if you're thinking, always can hope anyway, if you're thinking 12, 12, 12, or let's go with this 15, 15, 15, only adds up to 45%. So what's the other 65%? And if you've ever put on a granular fertilizer, which is what this bag would be, if you've ever had to help your dad spread it on the yard or spread it around the plants in the garden, it looks like little pieces of gravel. And in fact, that's what you're seeing is little tiny pieces of gravel. The other 65%, in the case of a granular fertilizer, would be just little rocks. So people say, why am I buying little rocks? It's because if you bought pure fertilizer, it would be dust. And if you put it on straight, if it was windy, it would blow away. and it would probably be too concentrated and it would be likely to burn. And so they basically take little rocks and they soak the little rocks in this liquid that has the minerals in and let the water evaporate. And that way you can have it soaked into those little rocks that just become part of the soil when they're spread on. Even something like Miracle-Gro that dissolves in water would not add up to 100%. And a lot of that's just a safety factor because basically fertilizers, let me start again. Basically, fertilizers are kind of salt. And if you pour too much fertilizer on, that's like pouring too much salt on, even though it's necessary salt. And too much salt reverses osmosis, and instead of water soaking into the plants, too much salt around the roots pulls the water out of the plants and dehydrates them and kills them. We call it fertilizer burn. Occasionally I'll hear about a kid, I may have been one of them, who was assigned to fertilize and got bored and thought that no one would ever notice and just piled a bunch of fertilizer, put it on real heavy for a little while. And within just a couple of days, everyone knew what had happened because those spots were dead from the too much fertilizer. And I can just tell you, if you're a little kid and you do that, it usually doesn't go well when the parents figure out what was going on. All right. I wanted to mention to you, not much, but a little bit about, just a minute here, my PowerPoint isn't moving. There we go. There are a whole bunch of minor minerals. When I worked at Bourdines, people were always bringing in samples of plants. What's wrong with my plant? And frequently it was they needed some mineral. And around here, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's our soils or whatever, iron and sulfur were minor minerals that they frequently needed. So that's just a couple of the minor trace elements I'm mentioning because they seem to be needed quite a bit around here. I did want to take a few minutes, and look at what happens when the plants are not getting enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. This is a bean plant, and you will notice, well, you won't notice, you may already know this, good chance you don't. This plant is nitrogen deficient. So if you notice along some of these leaves, I hate that little side shoot. Along some of these veins in the leaf, it's very dark along the edges, very dark along this vein. But then in this area here, it kind of gets very light. That is a fairly common sign of nitrogen deficiency, where the veins are green, but the space in between the veins isn't. And this would be more common for nitrogen on the young leaves. Young leaves are usually found near the top of the plant. So as the new leaves grow, as the plant's running out of nitrogen, it can't make enough protein. Chlorophyll is a protein, and so they tend to get lighter and lighter green as it gets more and more nitrogen deficient. Now, as I recall, sulfur deficiency looks almost the same. So sometimes there's a confusion between nitrogen and sulfur deficiency. People say, man, I put on the nitrogen, but it still isn't growing, but what they really needed was a little more sulfur. And by the way, why is sulfur important? If you remember all the way back to the first unit, and the proteins and the primary structure, and then there was the secondary structure. which was coiling and pleats, the alpha helix and the beta pleated sheets. And if you remember that all of those structures were held together by disulfide bonds, that's why sulfur deficiency is a problem. The plant may have enough nitrogen to make the proteins, but it doesn't have enough sulfur to hold the proteins in the right shape to make them functional. Now, let's see. This was nitrogen. This is phosphorus deficiency. The thing about phosphorus deficiency, okay, this is really obvious. This is this purplish red color in the leaf. The thing about phosphorus deficiency is that a lot of plants, they don't turn purple, they just kind of sit there and don't grow. I mean, phosphorus makes DNA. If you're going to make new cells, you have to have new DNA, new chromosomes for each cell. So a lot of times when plants are phosphorus deficient, they just sit there not growing because they can't make new chromosomes, or just barely growing, and they look perfectly green and they look perfectly okay. Usually by the time you start seeing the symptoms of phosphorus deficiency, the plant is too far gone to save. So, but that's a what is that? That was a cotton. That's a cotton plant, which unless you came from down south, there's a good chance you haven't seen cotton plants. I've actually only seen cotton plants in the fall after they're all dead and waiting to be harvested. So this is, what do we have left? Potassium deficiency. And what you'll notice is that this has a yellowing leaf also, but also the outer margins of the leaf tends to die. So you've got more or less healthy green spot in the center, and then a yellowing spot as you move out, and then shriveled up dead margins as you hit the edge. Remember, the potassium is turning on the activating enzymes, and so the leaf can't function right without the activated enzymes. Frequently, these are the lower leaves that are yellowing and shriveling along the edges, because the potassium gets moved up to the top of the plant where the new leaves are growing. So a lot of times the deficiency with potassium is in the lower leaves versus the higher leaves in the nitrogen, the newer leaves, the new growth. Now, the bad news is that a lot of these deficiencies result in yellow leaves. So, you get another few years under your belt, you own your own house and you plant your own plants, and you say, man, the leaves are turning yellow. What's wrong? Well, depends on which leaves and how, because yellow leaves is a symptom of just an awful lot of deficiencies. And most plants kind of like the soil to be slightly acidic, surprisingly enough, not strong acid, but on the acidic side. And a lot of our soils around here in Michigan tend to be not so acidic. So also soils that aren't acid enough cause problems to plants, and the plants can't adequately utilize the nitrogen. So not quite acidic enough soils also looks like a nitrogen deficiency, but it's not that the nitrogen's not there, it's that the plant can't use it. So yeah, there's a lot going on, a lot of possible different options. The next thing we'll talk about is water in plants, and this is actually a little bit complicated. So I'm not going to start into it until after spring break, which it just seems weird to sit in my chair and say, all right, after this class, it's spring break. And, what's the difference? I guess tomorrow I go outside instead of sitting in this chair. So anyway, that's all I'm going to do today. A little bit shorter than usual, but that's all right. Make sure you get the sorry, didn't mean to freak you out. Make sure you get the quiz taken. Try and do that by 3. And have a good vacation. You know, go up to the attic or something exciting. All righty. We'll see you then.